Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My guest today is Charles Descarfino. How are you today?
Good, Clayton. Thanks for having me.
I was told to actually get in contact with you through, I think, Mike Aarons. He's like, you should talk to Charlie. He's done so many shows, and I looked you up on IBDB, and I was like reading down the list from Sweet Charity, Thoroughly Modern Millie, Threepenny Opera, Seussical, Titanic, Porgy and Bess, Young Frankenstein, Ragtime. It's just the list goes on and on. What got you into playing musicals, and when did it all get started?
It got started actually. I think you referenced the IBDB thing, but 2 shows before the first one that's listed on there, City of Angels. But my first show was actually Sweet Charity with Debbie Allen. I don't remember what year, 1980s, sometime in the 80s. But the story with that was I had gone to William Patterson College, and one of my first teachers there was Joe Passaro, who was very busy percussionist in town. Afterward, I had studied with his teacher, but we had a relationship from actually playing gigs together because he would play percussion, I would play drums. He had a Brazilian group and whatnot. He was doing Sweet Charity. My first daughter had just been born. What happened was they had done an out-of-town run with the show in Los Angeles, and they used 2 percussionists. They decided when they came to New York, they were only going to use one. At the time, Bob Fosse was still here, and he was the choreographer. Of course, you can't do everything with one guy that you can do with 2. And Fosse had all kinds of, those movements. Everything was a brake drum, a cowbell, a whistle, this, that. Of course, certain things missing from the orchestration, and he freaked out. He said, "Where's this? Where's that? Get another player in here." Joe recommended me to John Miller. John called me up. I said, "Oh, well, I had my kid, my baby. My wife was back to work." He said, "When do I have to come?" He goes, "Now." So I called up my wife. "You have to come home from work. I got to go into the city." And that was the start of it. Yeah, so I became second percussion on that show. And then I would move over and play Joe's part once he started taking off. Got to know John then. And that ended up being also a very long-term relationship, which has been great.
What was it like working with Bob Fosse?
By the time I got there, I didn't see too much of Fosse's because they were already in previews. I didn't see too much of really the work going on with Bob Fosse. The only thing I remember was going to the cast party and how he was dancing on the dance floor with about 15 absolutely gorgeous dance girls surrounding him on the dance floor at the Marriott Marquis for the opening night party.
Were you on the dance floor as well?
With my wife, a distance from it. Yeah.
William Patterson. Were you born in New Jersey and in New York?
Yes, I was born in New Jersey. Yeah.
When did you start getting to playing drums? Was it in somebody that you saw? Was it something that you heard on the radio? Or
so yeah, all of that. And my father plays saxophone, and as a kid, he actually played gigs, all like lots of bars, restaurants, nightclubs, right? The MOR scene, the kind of stuff where they would do the kind of stuff Sinatra did and Tony Bennett and, that genre of music. And my father would work 5-6 nights a week besides his day gig, playing in nightclubs. And the musicians were good. I had a music influence in the house from him. And then I showed interest in drums, of course, with the Beatles and, Ringo, the whole thing. And he was playing with a drummer that eventually became one of the drummer for the Four Seasons, their live band. He got me studying with him. I was very young, and then I was on and off with it in those early years. I got really into it. I took lessons for a long time. Then Then I kind of was out of it for a little while, and then I got back into it. And eventually, just by the time college came, I decided the only thing I was really interested in doing was going to school for music.
Did you see yourself being a teacher of music, or did you want to just perform?
I just wanted to perform.
Was it a percussion focus or drum set or both?
My initial thing was really just the drum set, but I had odd guidance, from school and whatnot. I wanted to play in the orchestra. In my school, the rule was if you wanted to play in the orchestra, you had to play in the marching band. If I were to go back and do it again, I'd say I probably would have just played in the marching band. But being 15 and 16 years old and having this thing in my head, I was one of these guys with the long hair and the army jacket and patched jeans. And I didn't see myself with that, with the marching thing. And so I held out, now I think foolishly, but whatever it was, I did. But at the same time, my interest still was drum set at the time, and I wanted to go to Berkeley. And when I went to my guidance counselor in high school as a junior, they're asking me, well, what do you want to do? Well, I want to go to Berkeley School of Music. What do you mean? I looked this up. This is not even an accredited college. You just can't go any place, blah, 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 blah. I got this rap from the guidance counselor, like, oh, it was bad information. But again, I didn't know better. And then also I heard it was also expensive. I had heard that they had a good program at William Patterson. At the time, Thad Jones was running the jazz band there. And so I ended up getting drawn to William Patterson. But I also had this idea that I wanted to expand my knowledge and music. And I thought it would be a good idea to learn percussion, to learn how to, bring the pitch world into my knowledge. I decided to go and study percussion there. But I also, my first semester, I was in the jazz band. What happened was my percussion teacher was a pretty hardcore guy. He kind of wouldn't quite take you as seriously if you were playing drums in the jazz band. Eventually, I ended up going with his thing. I wanted to play in the percussion ensemble. And as much as I continued doing the gigs outside of school, and continued playing drums in all kinds of groups and original groups and club dates. I didn't do it much in school, after that. But I did play in the jazz band at first with that Thad led. And Elvin used to come and coach us too.
Oh, wow, really?
Yeah, that was pretty spectacular for me.
So was it a thing where the percussionist looked down on the jazz program, like a lot of jazz musicians look down on rock musicians?
No, I don't think it was that. But I think my teacher had great respect for the drummers. His thing was either you're going to do this or you're going to do that. It was like, in other words, I don't, going back, I don't think, and I think he may have even changed his tune about it as years went by. But I think he felt like, either you're going to focus on this or you're going to focus on that. And, if he wanted a kind of complete dedication to what he was doing, if you chose to do that.
During your time at William Patterson, were you learning about conducting as well?
Yes. That was one of the things that he had us do. As you went on, into your later years, he started having you conduct. This was mostly all contemporary music, dedicated to 20th century kind of chamber music and classical music in that genre. So we got a lot of experience, conducting odd meters and all that kind of stuff. So it was great, and also being clear. Because if you're conducting that stuff, if you're not clear, you just really just got to go home, because it's just, you're not helping anybody, you know.
Did you have ideas that you might want to be part of the New York Philharmonic or the New Jersey Symphony, or no,
No,
that wasn't your thing?
no, no. I never really particularly wanted to be specifically an orchestra, just an orchestra player, and being in a group where that's basically all I did. Because, like I said, I just came from a very different place. And you know what? The weird thing is that, in a way, it remained that way for my whole career. In a certain way, I did end up making most of my, once it got started in town, most of my living as a percussionist, certainly on Broadway. Most of my shows were all on the percussion chair. That's one of those things. Also, you get known as that. My first opportunities were as a percussionist. Could have turned out, I had asked somebody about playing a drum book, and they didn't have, they had their guys, they didn't need somebody, blah, blah, blah. Then the opportunity to, the call came to do a percussion book. And then the next call was a percussion book. And then they started coming in pretty rapid succession, percussion book. Eventually they, people found out through various means that I played drums. And then I would start getting, by that time the mold was cast, but I would start getting the shows that required drummer that played mallets and timpani as well. That was like Porgy and Bess was like that, Threepenny Opera,
When you got out of college, did you stay around the New York City area, and were you trying to get into Broadway, or
Yeah,
were there
yeah,
other?
yeah.
So you focused on the whole Broadway scene, and that's where your
I
focus was, or were you doing other things like club dates as well?
No, it was all, but I was leaning towards getting away from the club dates. I wanted to do work more in town on, a level of gigs that I felt, were more, how can I put it, just, commensurate with the work that I did, learning what I learned at school, so it wasn't just Broadway. I did start getting the opportunity, um, to start doing a lot of the orchestras in town, the American Composers Orchestra, the American Symphony. At the time, Brooklyn Philharmonic was a great group that I played with a lot. And that was another place where they started using me when they did pieces that had drum set in it. I would play drums a lot there. There were some places that knew about my drumming, and I worked it in. But that's not something that comes up all the time in orchestral world. But those gigs were coming up more and more, all the time. And I really like that. I mean, I love going and playing concerts at Carnegie and, Lincoln Center and what have you. And it feels right that, after putting in all this work, that, you're using your skills in a place where, it feels like it matters, including, the Broadway shows, same thing. So Broadway was really a great way to, I'm very grateful for all of this, because I raised, I had two daughters, I raised a family with this. And, at this point, I have really nothing but gratitude for all of it.
One of the things that I like to ask people, because a lot of people are inquiring about how to get into Broadway shows. Now, you started out in the 80s. It was a different scene. There's a lot of different types of shows back then. It's different now. I mean, we have social media and we have, our phones. What did you do to introduce yourself to people that played Broadway shows when you weren't in the scene?
Just as you're saying, really, the scene has changed so much. And I saw it change slowly as, I was going through the career, but in the last few years, it's changed greatly. And I think I almost have to honestly say that I don't know if my experience when I came in can even be comparable to what young people are doing now, or how people are getting introduced to the scene now. When I started my career, there were older percussionists that I had met, been introduced to, guys that were probably my age now, or maybe even a little younger at the time, because they still had some years. And this was their thing to me, and it was rough to hear, but it didn't deter me. Boy, I'd hate to have to get started now. I'd hate to be starting my career now. This was 40 years ago. Okay, so when I was coming in, one of the guys that I met was an older fellow. He was one of the original percussionists on Cats, right? He was formerly a very busy guy in the studios. Just so happened out here, when I was in college, a group of my college, colleagues, fellow students, percussionists, we got into this thing. We found this book that our music history teacher gave us of Gregorian chants and Renaissance music. And we got into playing it in a mallet ensemble, 2 marimbas, 2 vibraphones, orchestra bells, and it was really cool. We had a lot of fun doing it, and we were looking for a place to play. As much as I really didn't, whatever, I went to my old church that I grew up in, and we had the idea at Christmas time, because we had a lot of this music was Christmas music, maybe we could do a concert in a church. So I went down and asked the priest. He was like, yeah, you can come to and play midnight mass, and we'll have you play in the places where they usually have music. So we did it. Turns out this guy that I'm telling you about, this percussionist, was in church. He was there. He lived in the next town. This is the guy that was to do Cats. He comes up to me at the thing, and he was impressed with our playing and said, oh, where do you live? He said, well, I live right here in the next town. I grew up in this church, and not that I was necessarily going much anymore, but that's another story. But so he said, oh, why don't you come over and, we can play some duets. And I did, blah, blah, blah. This was another guy that I met that introduced me, had me, he was actually the first guy I ever subbed for on Broadway. He did a show called Nicholas Nickleby. Here's something that I think will never, ever happen again in the history of Broadway. This guy, I don't know, I could use his name. He's passed. He was a wonderful guy. His name was Jack Jennings. He had a good relationship with the contractor. At that time, there was a contractor named Mel Rodman, who contracted most of all the British shows. And this was the Royal Shakespeare Company. And he loved Jack and was very loyal to Jack. Jack said, yeah, you know what? I can do the show, but I can't do opening night. He goes, but I have somebody I'll teach him the show, and he'll play opening night for me, and then I'll, play the show. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine telling one of your conductors now, yeah, I can do it, but I can't do opening night. But I'll have somebody ready for you.
That's funny.
Can't imagine that, right? So right. This is how it worked. He brought me to rehearsals for the show, and he would play the part, and then he'd hand me the mallets. Somehow, the contractor worked this out, told the conductor this was what's going to happen. Conductor was cool about it. I would play, and then he would do it, and then I would do it. And then I got the music. I took it home. I made sure I was like, note for note, everything was going to be perfect. I went in, and I played opening night. and it was fine. Then he took over, and I subbed for him. And then after the first Sweet Charity closed, that we came back, to Broadway, and Jack was already doing Cats, so they gave me that gig. So this the ball was rolling at that point already. So there wasn't much more I had to do. I didn't start, cold calling people or anything. I just started getting called for shows. That their work was waning in the studio, and they were now kind of migrating to Broadway. The studio guys, is what was happening. So they saw a part of the business, that was very busy for them and very lucrative, of course. With the jingles and everything and the residual payments, and that was starting to go away on them. So they were like, man, but then, I didn't do the work they did. I didn't do much of the work they did. There was, I did some recording, of course, and, over the years, but not nearly what those guys did, because a lot of those guys, that was their job. They literally took the bus into town every day to a recording studio, and that was their gig. They were just always recording. It would be jingles, film, groups, because this before, and then the took a while. All singers had groups behind them that were recording musicians. Until the Beatles, that whole scene took over, and you had actual groups recording their own music. So they saw part of their thing dissipate, and they felt like this is going to be really hard. We found other ways. Maybe the work that I didn't do in the studio, I made up with all the orchestral work and the club dates and the shows. That all it added up to be enough. It added up to be enough to raise to raise a family and make a living. Fortunately, I was fortunate. I mean, there's a certain amount of luck, I guess you'd have to say, involved, because who you meet, and some like I'm saying, that guy. What was the chances? We were playing in the church, and this guy happened to be there and heard me and introduced himself, and then had me sub for him, on these gigs to help me get started with a reputation as being somebody who can do that. I mean, there's what is it? I don't know what that is. There's luck. It's also putting yourself out there, I guess, right? So you go, whatever kind of gigs you're doing, you go and you always try to do your best. So when people hear you, more likely a good thing is going to happen than a bad thing. I think you have to keep your focus on that for sure.
With all of the changes that have happened in the music business as well as the Broadway business, and the reduction of studio work, even the reduction of the amount of work on Broadway. I mean, there are 41 theaters, from what I understand, Broadway theaters. There are about 20 musicals. That means 20 drummers and maybe 15 percussionists. And there's so many people trying to get into playing shows. Do you feel the same way about people trying to get into Broadway now as that person did in the, when you were trying to get in? Do you like, oh my God, I don't know how these people are going to get into this business now? Or are you like, just what's your opinion of that?
I don't want to go there, because I think that, I heard that, and that was a bit demoralizing to hear, at the time. Again, like I said, I was kind of determined not to let that affect me, and I think it worked out. And I think that the young people now, there's two things. I think that they shouldn't let it deter them either. Yes, there are less gigs. I think it's probably more difficult to, to break in because there's so many also more young people doing it. I mean, there are so many young people coming at it and playing great, coming out of music schools, coming out of Juilliard and NYU, Manus, and getting there in Manhattan, wherever. And these kids come in, they're some of them are playing great already, and what they're not, they'll learn. I don't think any of us came in perfect at our first gig. I mean, I was perfect, no perfect as I could be, but I still had a lot of experience. When I started, that needed to be gained when I started, and learned a lot from a lot of different guys along the way. I think and still learn, from guys along the way. I think that's just a lifelong process. But as far as getting in, if it's something you want to do badly enough, I think you go for it. And the other part of that is that, but don't, if you were asking my advice, I would say don't make it the only goal. In other words, do whatever else you have to or can do in the meanwhile you're getting to that goal, and learn whatever you can to bring to the next gig. You know what I mean? And also, like I said, you never know who's out there listening. I remember at Titanic one day, some guy comes down and goes, "Hey, how you doing?" I said, "Oh, nice to meet you." He goes, "I'm a percussionist." He says, oh, what's your name? I couldn't see him that well. The pit was covered. Emil Richards, the big recording percussionist from LA, was in
Oh,
the
wow.
audience watching the show. So you never know, who's there. City of Angels. I'm playing, there's congas at the end. At the end of the thing, some guy leans into the pit, and I didn't recognize him at the time. Goes, "Hey man, nice congas." Waves is off. I think Charlie, that was Don Elias. Just try to bring your A game all the time. Hopefully the right thing happens.
Somebody said producers lie and shows close. Did you ever get content on a show like, okay, I finally got my show? Oh, so okay, tell me. You're
No.
shaking your head. You're like, no.
Yeah, no. I never got content on a show. In terms of that, in terms of, look, I'm not going to say, some gig that I knew was not going to be fun. Maybe the money was not right and whatever. No, yeah, I'm just going to stay and do the show, because I'm not going to put myself through that particularly. And not just for the reason of that I know the show is going to close. That's one reason, and that's a pragmatic reason to keep outside things going on. But the other part of that is, if you're only doing the show, you get really good at doing the show. But when you go out to do something else, you'll find your skills slipping in those other areas because you're not keeping those honed. So if I'm in a show and I'm playing, xylophone, and mind you, it's the same xylophone part every night, right? So once I learn it, I'm not really honing my xylophone skills anymore. I learned it. So that's another story. Now, if I'm just doing that for 3 years, when I go back out, my skills, even on that, are going to be rusty. But in terms of the drum set and other instruments and other setups and other ensembles, whether it be an orchestra, chamber music, a jazz trio, or whatever, a pop gig. I feel like it's always important to keep that going, to keep your full musicianship going. I think that was a large part of the reason behind the 50% rule originally, so that musicians don't stagnate in a show. Stagnate doing one thing for, you don't know how long it's going to be.
Your longest show that you've had on Broadway was?
I had four that were about the same length, and the longest ones were about 2.5 years. That was my longest runs. There's always the danger as time goes on, because some guys did that. They just, oh, I got a gig, I'm good. I'm just going to sit here and do this over and over again for years and years. And then by the end, they kind of can't really play out so much anymore. I'm talking about particularly ones that decided not to continue, because a lot of those people did continue their careers outside the show by using the 50% rule. And then usually you find them after the show's over, that's it. They're not there, a lot of times also they're done. They're done playing. It's funny because everybody wants the big smash hit. Everybody wants the show. I want, and of course it's always hard to give up that paycheck when that stops, because you don't really know when the next one is coming. So there's that feeling of insecurity always that you're going to deal with, in those last weeks of the show. It's like, oh shoot, it's like, here we go now. Is there going to be enough? Is that I'm going to have to start learning shows, subbing, whatever it is. From my perspective, I feel like I've had the luckiest Broadway career I could possibly have. So why? I did like around 20 shows that were my own gig. That's a lot. The one downside is, you going through every time the lock-in period and the breaking in new subs and having to make sure your conductor's happy with your subs, all that. That's always an issue. So that was a lot of times to have to deal with that. But the positive side was the music never wore out its welcome. I was moving on, unfortunately, moving on to the next thing. And all these shows were different styles of music. I had different conductors who had different styles of working with us, different colleagues who were all different styles of players. I met and worked with so many great people and great musicians, many of whom are, now my closest friends. I consider myself with that kind of thing as really among about as lucky as you can get.
City of Angels, Tommy, Titanic, Seussical, Adventures of Tom Sawyer, Thoroughly, Modern Millie, Sweet Charity, Threepenny Orchestra, Les Mis. You were on Les Mis too.
The first revival.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Young Frankenstein, Ragtime, Elf, Baby It's You. Follies, Porgy and Bess, Elf, On the Town, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. You were with Warren Oates on that, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's a list of, I guess, a partial list maybe of all the shows that you've done. And like you said, there are various amounts of styles. There are various amounts of styles that you've done on these shows and played. And I guess it would keep you kind of on your toes and interested in the music, since it's so varied and you're playing with different people and you're working with different conductors. You learned how to conduct while you were in college, and you also were an assistant conductor on Thoroughly, Modern Millie. Now, being in the pit, looking at the conductor, making sure that you're in sync, especially as the drummer and as the percussionist too, being on the other side, being in the conductor's podium, how different is it being on the other side, knowing that you have to conduct everybody? And when you do that, what are you expecting from the drummer and percussionist?
So the first show that I did that was with City of Angels, and the drummer was my dear late friend Dave Radicek, who is just one of the most marvelous drummers and human beings. So he really made it easy there. But the thing about it, it was really interesting to have the two side perspective, because the conductors are really dealing with a lot. One of the hardest things that I did, not necessarily because some of those percussion books were really difficult too, but conducting was a real challenge. And I had to put a lot of work into learning those shows to do that because, you know, you're trying to keep two disparate places in sync. You've got a stage with people up above and the pit down here. And you're trying to make sure that these things don't come apart, right? And lots of things are happening besides just the music in the meantime to distract you from this. You start this when this particular set comes in, you've got to start, and if you don't sync up right, it's not going to, and if the tempo's too fast, it's not going to, land in the right place at the right time. It's a myriad of stuff that you've got to keep in your head, and as well as performers, their own, oh my God, I feel like it's fast today, I feel like it's slow today, whatever it is. It gave me a lot of empathy for the conductors to get up there and do that, because a lot of times musicians, they're just up there waving their hands, or, we're making all the sound. No, it's not. They've got a tremendous amount of responsibility. You up there, you can stop the show. If you screw up enough, everything stops. It's on you. It's on you. Conductors also need to really be grateful, and a lot of musicians, they can use more trust as well a lot of times. I feel and certain conductors really do trust their musicians and get a great response from doing that, and certain other ones don't seem to be able to do that. And I think the response a lot of times from musicians is not quite as favorable.
Out of all the shows that you've done, do you have a favorite?
I think one of the most amazing shows was City of Angels. That was just the whole thing about it. The band that John put together for that was really all stars. Whether I belong there or not, but we had Dave Fink, Dave Radicek, Mike Migliori, Lee Musiker. It was just insane, and the music was fantastic. Cy Coleman just wrote this amazing stuff. That's like an album. Did you ever hear that? I'll tell you what. I don't say often go listen to cast albums. That might be one that you would go listen to. But that being said, almost all the shows that I've done, I got something out of, and I liked in a different way. Titanic was spectacular score. It was a completely different kind of thing. Big anthemic, music with huge timpani parts, and it was great. It's just a beautiful score and fun to play. But I would say that all of them had something to offer. And again, like I said, the great part was doing so many different ones. It didn't go on forever, because no matter what happens with the repetition, I always try to keep my mind on, okay, let me execute this the best I can every night. That's the game. In other words, it's like, but it's hard too. It's hard because after a while, it's like, oh my God, I've got to climb this mountain again. It's the same mountain. You know what I mean? You just played a matinee, you go out and you have some dinner, you come back, you're totally exhausted, and you got to do it again. And it's a real challenge to keep that concentration sometimes.
How did you maintain your sanity and or keep things fresh?
Well, like I said, by taking off and doing other gigs that were available, that I always felt was really important. And then the other thing is just having great colleagues all the time, going out for dinner in between, whatever, whatever it was, and hanging out before the show and after the show. I've been lucky, I think, all my shows, I just nary think of a place where I didn't like pretty much everybody that was there.
You were to meet somebody who runs up to you, says, hey, Charlie, Mr. Descarfino, I just like to get into Broadway. What's one thing I should know?
It might take you a while. It might take you a while to get in, but you should be respectful. Let it be known to people in whatever least invasive fashion that you can, that what your capabilities are and what you're interested in. And when you get the opportunity, make sure you're ready.
Might take me a while. What do you mean by a while? I got my rent is $2,500 a month.
No, you might have, right, exactly. You might have to find some other stuff to do while you're waiting. Be it hopefully other gigs if you can find it, or whatever else you have to do.
As drummers, we can have injuries just like any other person that does any kind of physical job. Carpal tunnel or tendonitis, and doing the same show the same way every night for a long period of time could exacerbate certain conditions. Did you ever have any kind of drumming injuries?
One weakness, fortunately, I never had anything that got to the point of stopping me from playing, but I've had bouts of tendonitis in my elbow. Mostly that would come if I was not playing enough, and then suddenly, I think when that mostly happened was having to play 4 mallet parts, because now there's a lot of weight in your hands with that, and if it's a very busy four mallet part and those muscles aren't built up enough, that's when I've run into kind of tendonitis issues, a little bit in the elbows. But that's about all I've had to contend with, and it never got so bad that I had to actually stop playing.
What are some of the things that people might need to know about, getting to a show on time, and the things you need to think about if you want to live in the city or out of the city? And why did you choose to live out?
The choice to live out was, for me, was a more of a pragmatic situation, because we were talking before, the kind of work that I was doing leading up to getting busy in town required, I was moving a lot of percussion instruments, I was moving drum sets, and it was really difficult. It was much easier to be out here and have all that stuff in the garage, boom, loaded into the van and go. In the city, it would have required having a space and all this kind of stuff. And I was pretty busy doing that. We used to do education concerts, percussion group. And then by time, maybe I was getting busy enough where it would have been really convenient to live in town. We had a kid, I had my daughter, and my wife we both grew up around here. So there was more of just a pragmatic, and we're used to living here. I could still get into the city. I think it is, for if you're a young person, you don't have any ties. I think it's a lot more convenient, and you're also in a place where you're easily and more readily available. Because you always want some subs in town, because if something happens last minute, it's much harder for the guys to get there from out of town, because you don't know what they're going to be facing traffic wise, So that's the thing. The other thing I would say is that in terms of if your real ambition is to play Broadway, I mean, if that's your number one prime goal to reach, the people that come and go to school in town here end up having an advantage in that way because they're already here. They tend to start working or studying with players that are involved in, the musical scene at large in the city, and that will include Broadway. I've been introduced to a lot of young students from NYU because John Haas down there has a program with a lot of percussionists in it. He does a lot of he has a Broadway seminar there. You meet them there, they're exposed, and then some of them, they're in town. And like you may end up finding yourself asking him, like, John, you have a good student. Is somebody ready? Oh, this kid has done this, that, and the other thing. Or there's, guys coming out of Juilliard, Manhattan, Manus. They're in proximity. Plenty of people have come down from Eastman School of Music and gotten gigs. But again, there's some kind of connection, either alumni or something. I think it's helpful when you're in proximity of where you want to work if you go to school there. And that probably doesn't even only hold true for music because you're in the community now.
I tend to learn from people's mistakes. I look at what people did right, what people did wrong. It's like, well, I'm not going to do that. All of the shows that you've done over the years, I'm sure you've made a couple of mistakes. What's a mistake that you've learned playing in pits as a drummer or percussionist that, you know what, anyone who hears this probably shouldn't do that? What would that be?
Wow, that's a good one, man. That's a tough one. But to really know your position, you know what I mean? In other words, for example, I see sometimes people get into adversarial relationships with a conductor, for example. That's a bad idea. Somehow, and it might not be, you may be right, but it might not be your position to make the call. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's kind of like a careful stuff. And if I've ever done that, I've really tried to be careful about that because, it's important to know, whatever you think, there may be something going on that that you're not aware of, why you're being asked to do something. And maybe some people are not good at communicating that to you, but, and I'm not saying if you can be respectful about questioning, but to just get into an adversarial scene, which I've seen happen, on a number of positions, I think is one of those mistakes and avoid at all costs mistake.
Don't get into an adversarial relationship with the conductor,
or your colleagues. If it's
yeah, especially after you have to be with them 6 days a week, 8 shows. Yeah, you don't want to bring a bad vibe into the pit.
No, I know John used to say it's like putting together like a submarine, a team for a submarine. Everybody's locked together in this small dark place. And you don't really want anybody in there that's really going to start rocking the boat too much. You know what I mean?
It's a great analogy.
Yeah, and I think when it's done that way, and when the band is put together that way, it really makes work a lot easier. It just because when everybody's happy, everybody plays better. Everybody's more relaxed. Everybody's having fun.
And where can people find you on social media? You have a website?
No, I just have. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and it's just a mix. I tend to put my gigs up there and various certain things, but I don't have a particular musician, Charles Descarfino, drum percussion website. That might actually give me an idea. Maybe something I should work on.
Did you ever feel that you needed that, or you just like, I don't really need that. People know who I am.
Well, kind of that. I mean, that's one part of it, and the other part of it is, things are. You look, I'm not a young cat in the scene. Certain things, are changing, and it's a little slower now than it's been, but really up until, last year, I didn't really have the time to deal with it, And it was really kept busy enough to not with learning music and playing to not really do that, to not really spend the time doing that. It didn't really wasn't something that was on the radar.
Usually I ask people about their top 5 drummers, but I'm going to ask you something a little bit different. Your top 5 most influential musicians of all time.
Well, certainly, for me, drummers, would be big in that as far as musicians, but on the
you can include drummers in this list.
Yeah. So, of course, growing up as a kid, I was totally mesmerized by Buddy Rich. For a starter, that would probably be the most initial, highly influential guy for probably many of us. And then later on, going, the style of drumming that I liked a lot later was like Jack DeJohnette was really kind of my in the later years, and the music that I got involved with playing drum set. Really, Jack was huge. Keith Jarrett, of course, Coltrane and Thelonious Monk.
You travel all over the world, and you were, got to Stonehenge, which I think, I don't know very much about it. I just know it's one of the wonders of the world. But
yeah,
do you have, a favorite place that you've been to? It's like, oh my God, that is a place that I just absolutely love. Like for me, myself, when I got a chance to finally get to Hawaii, I just felt it's something about it spiritually. I just loved it.
It's spiritual. I agree, man.
Is there a place like that for you that's, that speaks to me?
Yeah. So many places, and Hawaii being one of them. My wife and I would go to, and there's that. Hawaii is just I feel like it's a spiritual place. I've been a lot because of ancestral, situation to Italy many times, and Sicily. I still have a family there that I visit. So I love it there. But this year we went to France, traveled through French countryside, Provence and stuff for the first time. It was just absolutely spectacular, man. Just spectacular. And like Stonehenge, we went to England. Actually went with Lauren the first week. We went to go visit Zev Katz and over in England. And we took a little side trip to go see Stonehenge. So that was a hoot. And then I met my wife in Paris, and we then drove through Paris, through France and Italy for like a month. It was great.
That's amazing.
I think there's so much to learn from traveling, man. I love it.
Even being one of the great things about being a musician, if you're fortunate enough, you can get paid to travel and be a musician and perform in different places. And it's like, wait, you mean to tell me you're going to fly me to Hawaii to play a big event and get paid a lot of money? Oh, yeah, I'll do that. Of course, yeah, the money is here and then it's gone, but you get to go and see the world if you can. I went to South Africa, the same thing. I went for a week there to play with a gospel choir. And
oh, that's great, man.
But traveling the United States under these tours, a Broadway tour, you get to see the United States. In the United States, if people haven't seen this country, you really should, because it's almost amazing how we keeping this country together. It's 50, really almost 50 separate countries to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But we're under the Constitution. I'm sorry for going kind of off the drumming thing for a minute. I might edit this out or not, but it's like you got Connecticut is completely different from Wyoming, which is different from California, which is different from San Francisco, which is in California. And you got Texas and Kentucky. When I was on tour with Footloose, I remember them telling me, it's like, oh my God, Gates' barbecue in Kansas City. Oh, that's different from the Memphis barbecue, which is different from Texas barbecue. I'm like, what are you talking about? And, people say, yeah, I'm having a barbecue this weekend. No, you're not having a barbecue. You're having a cookout.
Right.
Because barbecue is different than a grill.
Yes.
So right. I'm sorry for hijacking the conversation.
No, not at all, man. I love that. I love all that kind of stuff. I'm big on travel. I've traveled a lot around this country, not just doing gigs, but actually, the first time I got to Hawaii was on a gig, and I had never been there. And once I got there, and the gig was like, oh my God! The next year, I brought my family back there. It was like, well, I got to bring you guys to this place. It's unbelievable, And so, these things are there. You can't experience them without going. And you can see all the pictures in the world. Nothing does justice for the obvious thing as to the Grand Canyon.
Yes.
You can see it in the world, but when you're standing on the edge of that thing, you realize that no picture can capture even, the slightest feeling that evokes.
When you travel the world and you deal with other musicians across the world, I know that in places, in certain parts of Europe, they subsidize certain performing arts so that people can actually make a living as a musician. And people look at America, especially if you go to, from what I understand, you go to places like Japan, they look at American musicians like, oh my God, you're an American musician, and they revere us. I don't know if you had that experience going to other places where if you're a musician, you're treated differently than the way people look at musicians in the United States. Have you experienced that?
Well, yeah, because I think that most of the time when you're traveling to those places, you're going with something, with a group that has a certain, cachet or following. And so already right off the bat, you're not just kind of Joe Schmo. You're with, this guy's here with this group, and usually they're bringing you there because of some specialty that's happening. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's one of the reasons why it's always so wonderful when you do gigs out of the country, because most of the time it is that kind of a situation, and you tend to be getting special treatment, But yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It really is. And then just to be able to get some idea of or insight into these other cultures doing it is, I think, just that kind of stuff. That's the best thing about humanity to me. I find it amazing, how people are always talking about differences like as a bad thing. When we come into people, any kind of discriminatory situations with whoever, whoever is doing it, the people of the same country do it to one another, because they live in the north and they live in the south, whatever it is. The thing that I think people just always overlook, and it's so absurd to me, is the most beautiful and amazing thing about human beings is different cultures. Everybody brings something else to the table. You can start with food. Mm-hmm. How amazing is it that these people live here and they come up with this stuff to eat, and these people come from here and they come up with this, and everybody loves it? Then you got to love the people that bring it. You know what I'm saying? It's like, or they dance, or they wear something different. How cool is that? What do you mean? I just, it's unfathomable to me that people don't, and I think traveling is one of those things that really, brings those ideas home to you, because now you go and you're in the other people's space and you see, oh yeah, look, these people are wonderful, man. They're treating me nice, and they're making food for me. And if you're respectful, when do you? It's not that often. In my experience, look, there's crazy people out there, no doubt. And that's another story. But in terms of people that are not, and when you deal respectfully, how often do you get disrespect back from being respectful?
Right.
You know what I mean? So I don't know. That all plays into, getting along together when you're playing music, when you're in a pit, when you're in a band or an orchestra. It's all part of what you bring.
Again, it just reminds us of the humanity that we all share, and it's like Rodney King said, if we can't we all just get along?
Get along, man. I'm in 1,000% agreement with that. Yeah,
it's hard when there are crazy people that control the narrative and want to make things. Anyway, like you said, it's a whole other conversation, which we'll have a philosophical podcast on another day.
All right. Sounds good, man.
But anyway, it was great talking to you and great getting to know you a little bit better.
Same here, man.
And we will definitely keep in touch. And thanks for being a part of the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast.
Thanks for having me, Clayton. It was a pleasure. Keep doing the good work, man.
Thank you, sir. We will talk soon.
All right, have a great day.
All right, you too.
To continue producing the high-quality podcast you're listening to, publishing engaging newsletter content, and posting YouTube videos, we would appreciate any financial contributions you can make. At this time, we have no advertisers, and we'd like to keep it that way. Our staff is small but growing. We can only produce a show with listener contributions from people like you. There are a couple of ways you can do that. You can sign up to be a monthly or annual subscriber at BroadwayDrumming101.com. You can also contribute any amount you wish through PayPal at paypal.me/BroadwayDrumming101 or through Venmo at BroadwayDrumming101. Or help keep us caffeinated by buying us a cup of coffee or a week's worth at buymeacoffee.com/BD101. That's buymeacoffee.com/BD101. We appreciate any support you can give. Don't forget to subscribe to the Broadway Drumming 101 YouTube page. You'll find more content that isn't featured on the podcast or on the Broadway Drumming 101 Instagram page. Make sure when you subscribe to the YouTube page, you click on the button to be notified when a new video is published. Thanks again for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast. Thanks again for listening to the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast.